when you, one second. Yeah, sorry. So the situation I'm asking you to imagine is that you have made some changes in the data set, and when you want to update, at that time, the connection is not available. So now the changes that you made would be lost if you stop running your code. Okay. Supposing I made 5 updates, 3 inserts, 2 deletes. All of these are in the data set, but they have not gone back to the database. And they will go back to the database only when you call update. And while calling update, you need to have your connection open. But what if the connection is not available at that time? Now, these changes would be lost if you stop running your program. Now, what I'd like to do here instead is I'd like to serialize this into an XML file. The advantage of serializing it would be that I can save these changes locally into a file, and then I can come back at a later point, maybe tomorrow, whenever, after some time, and come back and deserialize and read the values again. So when I deserialize it, my dataset object will be recreated again. And I would then be able to make changes to the database at that point when my connection is available. So I'm going to take up this situation and I'm going to show you how we can do this. Now, we saw how serialization happened. To do serialization, what did you need to do? First thing is you needed to mark the class as serializable. Secondly, you had to use one of those formatters. So you had different formatters. You had a binary formatter, you had a SOAP formatter, you had an XML serializer, you had a JSON serializer. So all of these different formats were supported for you. Now, in a data set, you don't need to do any of that. The data set has inbuilt methods that support serialization to an XML file. So instead of doing serialization the way we did earlier, we are going to see some inbuilt support for serialization for a data set. Am I making sense? Are you all clear on what we're going to try and do? Essentially, we're going to save the data set into an XML file without using the longer technique of serialization that we tried. I'm saying the data set has a direct option of doing so. And then we can deserialize it at a later point as well. So let's see how we can do this. So that's the first thing that I'm doing. I'm saving it to an XML file. And the second thing that I'm doing here is, yes, what are we doing here? Read from
XML file.
XML file. So this would be what would be at a later point of time. Let's do the first thing first, saving to an XML file. Now, the data set, as I said, has inbuilt methods for saving to a file. So you have two options available here, write XML and write XML schema. The schema file for an XML thing, I'm sure you all know this, but in case you don't, the schema file stores the structure of the XML. It stores the constraints. It stores the relations between tables, between your XML data. And the XML file itself stores the actual data. So your schema file, as the name suggests, is all the rules about that data, and XML file is the actual data itself. Now we have added a few constraints here. If you remember yesterday's code, we have added a few constraints, right? Now those constraints also I want to save. So the first thing that I'll do here is I will write XML schema, whatever, let's say imports ems.xsd, right? I'll write this XML schema file. The second thing that I will do is I will write the XML file. So two files I'm going to create. Schema file will store the constraints and the rules, and the XML file will store the actual data. So let's say, for example, I'm calling this ems.xml. Now with this, there is an overload called XML write mode. And XML write mode has these different options. So let's see what these options are. First thing is write schema. So what it says is, along with the data, also write the schema file. So this file will contain both schema as well as data. Now we are already storing the schema into a different file. So I don't want that write schema. The second option is ignore schema. Now ignore schema would only give me the data. Right? Would only give me the data. But when I save this data, it will not save all the changes that I have in my data set. Can any of you all tell me what are the changes that are kept track of the data set and how? What are the changes? Firstly, it keeps track, and how does it keep track? Would someone like to answer that question?
So if we are changing, then like there are states, right? So if we are not changing, then it is unchanged. If we are changing, modifying it, so and then each one has every state, and then using row state, it manages it.
Okay, so every row, well said, every row has a property called row state, which keeps track of what are the possible row states. And we discussed this yesterday. There are 4 row states: unchanged, then you have
modified,
deleted and added for different rows that might have been modified, added, or deleted. So these are the row states that you have. So very right, absolutely right. That is one thing. Another thing also, one more thing for modified rows. What else does it also keep track?
So row state version.
Rows, yeah. And what are the possible values there?
Current, original.
Very good. Well done. Very well done. Nice answer. So the current version is storing you only the current value, and the original is storing the value when the data set was first loaded. What are the value in there? So if you write with ignore schema, it will only store the current values. It will not store the row states. It will not store anything else. So the third option there, which is a diffgram, now stores a data set with all the changes, with the row state values and everything else that is in there. So the option I'm going to choose here is diffgram. Okay. So that's what I've done for saving to an XML file, reading from an XML file. What would I do out here? Exact reverse. So give me the code for that, please.
ds.read XML schema.
Correct. So I'm going to do this. First thing is ds is equal to new ds.
Yes, yes.
Right. I'll just, whatever is there in the data set will be destroyed. Agree?
Yes.
If the data set already had some values, I'm removing all those values by saying new data set. And then what? ds dot
read XML schema.
Very good. So they have got reverse 2 methods: read XML schema, and the same thing that I'm giving out here, which is what? ems.xsd. That's the first thing. And the second one, reverse again of the first one. Instead of write XML, you now have
read XML,
which takes, first thing is file
XML
name, which
file.
was ems.xml. And the second thing here is, now instead of a XML write mode, you have an XML read mode. So XML read mode dot different. So this is what we are actually using out here. So this is now recreating it. Are we clear on this? Okay. Now, after doing this, I'm doing again the same thing that I did here, which is what? After recreating the data set, what am I doing? What is this last line doing? What is this last line doing?
Showing ems table on the data grid.
Yeah, showing it in the grid. All right, showing that M stable in the grid. So sort of reloading that. So let's try running this code. Okay, I'll make some changes to this. Again, let's say Aditya's record, I change. Okay, so I made some changes here. Please remember what changes I made to Aditya's record. Okay, these are the changes. I'm updating one record. I'm deleting one record. So D'Souza now is again out of my database, and I'll add one record. All right, so this is what I've done. And I'll save this to an XML file. So now when I save it to an XML file, my data set has been saved into that file. Let's stop running this. And if I run this again, instead of these values, if I want, I can now read from the XML file. So if I click on read from XML file, notice how the values change, and I get the values that I've made, changes that I've made earlier. So this is what we have done. All right. Now what can I do? Now what can I do? If the database connection was available, now I can update all changes back to the file. I'm not doing that yet. I have not yet clicked on update. Okay. I want to show you what has happened in that XML file. Okay, now the XML file has been created in this folder, right? In your bin debug folder where your exe was. And let's try opening this file. I'll first show you access the file. So if you know XML, then I'm sure you understand what's happening here. If you don't, even then you'll get an idea about what is happening. Like for example, it's talking about EMS, and then EMS has this data. So this is the structure of that EMS data. Then you have DPS, and this is the structure of the department's data. And then your constraints have come in below. Okay. So you can see all the constraints that have been given here. These are all the constraints that have been given below in our code. So that is your XSD file. And I'm more interested in showing you the XML file. So look at this. The XML file contains this. Now, remember which record we had made changes? For whose record we had made changes? Aditya, who was employee number 3. We had updated his record. Secondly, we had deleted that Mr. D'Souza. I think record number 7 we had deleted. And we had added a new record, which is employee number 9. So see this now. These are all the original values. You see all of this is the original values. This one was employee number 3. Can you see this? What is this telling you? That the row state has been modified. And what values do you see here? What values are these? I had changed the basic. So what is this? Is this the original value or the current value?
Current value.
Current value. All right. So all the current values are shown here. I'll also show you where the originals go in. All right. And then this was, can you make out what this is? This is the row state added, the newly added row out here. So it has, has changes inserted. And if you go down here, this is the diffgram before. These are the original values. So for example, now what does it show you? Aditya's record had basic of whatever 60,000, which I changed to 77770. And then this one is here. Mr. D'Souza is found here. So Mr. D'Souza is not found here. If you see this, row order was 4, and then it has jumped to 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th records are deleted, and then you have the 6th. So if the 5th record is here, it means what? And it is not there in the current values. That means this is a deleted row. So this is how it has actually kept track of the rows. And that's how it's able to recreate the data set for you. Are we clear on this, everyone? All right, let's go back and update the values. So I can come back here and I can read the values in the XML file and I can update all changes back to the database. So these changes now have been stored in the database. How do I confirm that? If I run this again, you'll find the changes have been now, these are the changed values here, right? This has gone away, new record has been added, and Aditya's record has been changed. Are we clear on this? So this is how you can save your data set as XML. One last thing I want to show you out here. All right. I want to filter and show certain records only. So what I want to do is, when I run this, I want to only filter for department number 10. And when I click on, right now there's no code, of course. When I click on this, it should show me only the people with department number 10. To do this, what would I need to use?
Views.
Don't just call it view. You're right, but don't call it view. The correct term is
Data.
correct term is data view.
Data views.
Okay. So I think I might still have that open. So what are we doing here? We are creating a data view. So data view, just to recap quickly, is used when you want to do filtering or sorting of a data table. The data table directly cannot do filtering or sorting. But once the records are in the data table, you can do filtering and sorting using a data view. So let's try creating a data view out. Right? Data view, whatever, let's say dv is equal to new data view, and the data view is always based on a data table. So one of the properties here is which data table is it based on? Which data table is this based on?
EMPS.
Give me the whole thing.
ds.tables
ds.tables
Carry on.
and EMPS.
Of EMPS. So this is the table that it is based on. Now the data view has two main properties. One is sort. All right. One is sort. I'm not doing sorting here. And supposing I say sort on a particular column, let's say name, for example. So what will this do now here? What will this do?
sorting on the basis of name.
Sorting based on name. You can also give ASC or DSC. So basically, whatever you give in the order by clause, don't give the order by word, but whatever you give in the order by clause in SQL, that is what you can give out here. So you can say name descending also, namespace DSC also you can say. Or you can give combination of columns. So this is one thing that you could use. I'm not using that here in this example. The second thing that you can do is row filter. And row filter would be whatever you give in the where clause. So if you say select staff from employees where, whatever you give in the where clause after that can be given in your row filter. So row filter is equal to, and I'm going to say this, where department number equal to and plus textbox1.text. What is textbox1.text? That is whatever the user types in. So suppose he types out 10. It will be taken as what department number equal to, and then the value in this would be 10. Supposing I type 20, department number equal to 20, and so on and so forth. Are we clear on this? Now, after doing this, instead of picking up from the data, from the ds.tables of employees, I'm going to now pick it up from the data view. So what was this line doing? What is this line doing? What is this line doing? Line number 140.
You're showing EMPS table in the data grid view.
Right. So show the the EMPS table in the data grid view. Instead of showing the EMPS table, what am I now showing?
Data view of
Data
EMPS.
view.
I'm showing the data view. So let's see this. So let's say now I had filter for department number 20, and I click on filter. So it's showing me employees or department numbers 20. Filter 10 shows me 10, and so on and so forth. So I can now put in whatever filters I want to work. Are we clear on this? Now, although we have written code like this, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do this. We don't need to do this. Now, why don't we need to do this? The reason why we don't need to do this is that every data table comes with something called as a default view. Every data table has a property called default view. And what is the default view? If you look at the default view, what is this? It is of type
Data view.
Data view.
data view. So when you create a data table, you also get a default view with that data table. So you don't need to create a new view. So what I've done on line numbers 145 to 148, I don't need to do that, because my default view can change the way in which you're seeing the values from the data table. So when you're seeing this, you're actually not looking at the table. You're looking at the default view of the table. And instead of creating a new data view, now I can use the default view, and the default view would have what properties? The same properties as that of the data table, of the data view. So this is what I could do. Sorry. So what is this now? This here, the highlighted section here is like your DV. And this would have all the properties that a data view has. So this is what we're doing out here. So I don't need to do this line again. Because what are we changing here? We are changing the default view of that data table, and it will automatically pick up the values. So same thing, same effect as before. And if I now filter this, I get the values out. Sorry. Are we clear on this, everybody?
So,
Yes.
On line 140, when you said that ds.tables m,
40. Yeah.
yes. So when we are writing ds.tables m's, it means that
Yes.
we are
Yes.
seeing the
Yes.
default view, right?
Yes.
Then why
Yes.
did we write default view on line
You don't
150?
need to. It by default picks up from the default.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just saying that you don't need to do this. Creation of a second default view is not, of a data view is not required, because you are only looking at one way. Now, supposing that same data was being shown in two grids. Supposing you had two grids. One of them showed you employee numbers or other department numbers 10, another showed you department numbers 20. Now, in that case, you can't do the same thing with one view only. So there you will need to create an additional view. Suppose you want to show the same data twice in two different places. There you will need to create additional views. Otherwise, you don't need to do that. All right. Okay, so that completes my example on the data set. This is what I wanted to do with you all yesterday, but we ran out of time. So I've just made changes from the same example. When I upload my code, I'll upload yesterday's code again. So that's the project that contains these changes.
Sir,
Yes.
in text box, we are giving department number.
Correct.
If we supply other values that except department number, then it will show error or exception.
You want to filter for other things.
No, if you give wrong input,
it will obviously not work. Supposing I give the wrong value. Cannot find that. Okay. So if I
evaluate exception.
all right. So you'll have to handle the exceptions. I'm not written exception handling code. If your question is, what if I give a department number which is not there? Is that what your question is?
No, sir. Wrong input. And
The wrong
asking
inputs
for
will give an
number.
error. Will throw an exception. You have to do exception handling code then. Any code that you're doing, all right, it goes without saying that you have to put an exception handling code there. Now, I am not putting in because I don't want to, slow myself down. I don't have exception handling. I'm just explaining you the concept. Now, I expect you all to do what? When you're accepting input in whatever form. If you want to put in validations, then you put in that. Nobody's stopping you from doing that. Will this give an error? If I did this 1111, do you think it will give me any error?
No, sir.
What will this give me?
It will display nothing. Nothing.
Basically, it will display nothing. No records found in this case. All right. Okay. So I'm moving away from this example. I'm closing this example. I don't want to work with that example anymore. And we're going to move on to working with ASP.NET MVC applications. All right. So we're going to do a total shift. We're going to now get into UIs. Even the UIs that I showed you, I didn't explain the UIs. I was just basically using it to explain a concept. All right. So here is where now we're really going to get into the UI aspect of it. Now, the good news is that the code that you will write there, you already know. You already know the code. So you'll be writing code for, connecting to a database. Do you know how to do that? Answer is yes. You'll be creating classes. You'll be writing validation code. You'll be writing code in your classes to, have methods and whatnot. So all the code part of it, you already know. Now we'll focus on the UI and how the UI and the code mix, and then certain concepts related to the flow of the application. So that is what our focus will be over the next few days. All right. When you're creating web applications in .NET, you have two options available to you. You have something called as Web Forms, and you have ASP.NET MVC. Right. So ASP.NET Web Forms, whatever I mean, and ASP.NET MVC. So these are the two different approaches that you use out here. We are not going to be looking at web forms at all. In our course, we are not having web forms at all. But that is another whole new way of development. Okay. ASP.NET MVC is a different model from the way in which you work with web forms. So I just want to quickly highlight the differences. Okay, why would you want to go in for the first approach? Why the second approach, and what situations? But without looking in depth at the not looking in depth, without looking at all at the first option. So when you work with ASP.NET Web Forms, all right, the first thing is the code that you write is event-driven code. All right. Whereas with ASP.NET MVC, it uses the MVC pattern. All right. So the way in which you would write this would be more like WinForms. So the style of writing code will be similar to the code that we've been writing in the WinForms example. Like if you want to write code for a button, what do? Double click on the button and write code for the button click. So you find out what are the possible events that happen for that button and write code for that. Whereas this here uses more like a request response type of model. So this code, the event-driven code, is actually easier to write. And here this is a little more difficult, all right? Comparatively more difficult. Not that this is difficult. I suddenly forgot the spelling of comparatively. Okay. Lot of the code is handled by the system itself. Whereas here, the programmer has to do more of the coding. All right. So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the things that are happening behind the scenes in the first approach. You're not aware of quite a few of the things that are happening. They're like isolated from you. They are, you can write code in there without necessarily even knowing HTML, for example. I'll give you that example. So you can write code in ASP.NET Web Forms even without, I mean, you need to know HTML. That is, of course, very good. But even if you don't know HTML, even then you can actually go ahead and write code out there. Because a lot of the code is being handled by the system. Here, the programmer has to do everything, has to actually, specify what is to be done and all that. So, of course, this, therefore, this was easier, and therefore, this is comparatively more difficult. Inbuilt features like state management, for example, and we will talk about state management. Right, not inbuilt. I'll just put it this way. Now, in spite of these, so far what I've told you is what all the advantages that you would have over, Web Forms would have over MVC. If you compare this, your first reaction would be, okay, this seems to be easier. Why aren't people working with this? So the major reason is because now you are in charge. The programmer is in charge of working with this. He has more control over what is being sent out. Right? And here, of course, you have lesser control over what is being generated, what is the code being generated. That makes your code lighter and faster. And this code here is bulkier and slower. Right? Okay. This code is easily extensible. Right? Since you are creating your own things, it's easier to include third-party tools out here, or just sort of plugins out here can be very easily added out here. This is not so easily extensible. And right, it lends itself easier to test driven development, to other things like DevOps, other technologies like, let's say, maybe Angular or React. All of these can be more easily sort of incorporated out here, and this is sort of not so easy here. All right, not that it's not possible at all, but it's much more difficult out here. So if you look at this, the MVC pattern, although if you compare it with this, the programming model is slightly more difficult from a programming perspective, from an ease of use perspective. More, sort of has to be done by the programmer rather than things being happening here automatically for this. But the major advantage here is what? Major advantage here is what?
Faster and lighter.
More control and faster and light, and also easily extensible. So this has slowly sort of gained, I would say this is the way of doing it in most applications. Most people are now switching over to this. So initially, a lot of the projects were web form based projects, but in the last few years, more and more people are switching over to ASP.NET MVC. All right. Now, when you look at .NET Core, okay, when you look, we have not seen a lot of .NET. We have, I think we might have done 1 or 2 applications on .NET, 1 or 2 examples on .NET where there were certain extra features in .NET Core that were not there here, and we tried them in .NET Core. But other than that, all of that we've done with .NET Framework. But the future in .NET is going to be only .NET Core. Do you agree with the statement? Rather than framework, all the applications are going to be done on .NET Core. Why am I saying that? Why am I saying that?
It is deprecated.
No. I told you .NET 4.7, 4.8 here is the last thing in the .NET framework. First day I talked about this. In .NET framework, there is going to be no further development after 4.8. .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET 7. All of these are .NET Core based. All right. And they have announced that only thing that we'll be doing will be in .NET Core. Now, .NET Core does not support web forms. .NET Core only supports ASP.NET MVC. So, going ahead, people will be only working with these type of applications. Are we clear on this? So, you need to just be aware that there is something called as web forms also, which you could code with. In fact, not now, but maybe I think 2 years back, CDAC didn't teach MVC. So at 2 years back, the situation in the market was more companies were asking for ASP.NET web forms. But now the situation has changed. Now more companies are asking for MVC. So, assuming you get placed in a .NET company and assuming, you're working on web-based projects, I hope you don't get web forms, because, those will be the older projects that you're working. So hopefully you get, if at all you get placed in .NET. I think, generally the tendency is most people say, no, we want to do a Java, we prefer Java and all of that. And that's fine. That's your choice. But if you do get placed in .NET, hopefully, if you have a choice, if they ask you, if you want to do web forms or MVC, please choose MVC. All right. Okay, let's have a quick look at what is the MVC framework about and how we work with this and what are the things that we do. So you may have had an exposure to the MVC framework, and this is no different out here. But let's quickly talk about some of the key concepts. Why are we doing things where? You can do things in different places, but when we actually get to the code, understanding why you're doing things in a certain place is important. So the MVC pattern is a design pattern that is not, obviously only in .NET. Is available in a variety of different technologies, right? Here, the 3 key elements here are the model, the view, and the controller. Let's talk about each of these in detail, all right? So the MVC pattern, architectural pattern, separates an application into 3 main groups of components: models, views, and controllers. This helps us achieve separation of concerns. This term you'll use fairly often in MVC. So separation of concerns simply deals with saying that each one does one task and does that task well. You don't mix and match. Like, for example, if you're doing things in the controller, then you should only write code for which are controller related. And what is that code, we'll see in a minute. But each one does a specific job and does not interfere in the task of the other. So that helps you, it also helps in test-driven development. It allows you to, write your test cases better and test out your code a lot easier. Anyway, coming back to this, using this pattern, user requests are routed to a controller. So supposing you have somebody sending in a request, www.xyz.com, it comes to your site. So that's a user request that's coming in. Now this request is first sent to the controller, and the controller examines the the parameters of any or any other things from the URL. So firstly, when we talk about this in detail, I'll explain to you how the pattern matching works, how the URL patterns are formed. I'll explain that concept in a little bit, maybe a few minutes later. But the controller receives the request. That's the first starting point. Now the controller would have different methods written down there. So they are what are known as action methods that would be written down there. And these methods, one of the methods would be executed. Right? Now the code inside the method. So first thing is the URL will decide which method gets called. Now once the method is called, in that code, what does the controller do? What is the code that you would be doing out here? So the user requests are routed to a controller which is responsible for working with the model to perform user actions and or retrieve results of queries. Now there would be a model out here. The model essentially is the data that you have in your system. And this data that you have in your system would be represented by a class. So for example, if you wanted to show employee details on a particular page, the employee class would be your model. And what would a class contain? You have seen, what does a class contain? Firstly, data would be in what form? As? Yes? In a
Objects,
class, how will you represent your data? Louder, I can't hear you. Yes?
Entity.
Arey, nahi baba, simple.
Variable.
I want to jump into a small water this thing. Hindi translation. Data in your class, how do you represent that data? What do you write?
objects,
No,
With the properties.
in your class, properties. What's wrong
properties.
with you guys? Somebody in the morning sent out a message, something about feeling lazy. So data in your class would be represented as properties. Why? Because the data would also have validations on them. Now don't forget those concepts. Day 1, day 2. And what else would you have in your class? You would have methods in your class that work on the data. Like when you created the employee class, for example, one of the methods there was calculate net salary. So that calculated the net salary based on the data that you had in your class. So the model here is a class that represents the data and the actions that might be performed on that data. So the controller is responsible for working with the model to perform user actions and or retrieve results of queries. So you might have different methods in there in the class, which might be returning data for you. Now the controller will get this data from the model and pass this data to a view. And view is where it will be actually displayed. So the controller chooses the view to display to the user and provides it with any model data that it requires. So 3 key components. Controller is doing what? Firstly, handling the request, saying, okay, this is what the request came in, this is what I want to do. Then the controller will decide, which model should I load? I want to show this detail, so which model should I pick up? So it will create an object of some class, right, of your model class. And then this object of the model class, it will pass it to a view. View would be the actual UI that you're looking at. And the view would be responsible for displaying it. So each one is doing a separate task. What is the controller doing? What is the controller doing here in this case?
Taking the request on the
Handling
user.
the request.
Handling the
Basically
request.
controlling everything. The name
Yeah.
itself, controller, getting the request, deciding which model to pick up, and deciding which view to show. So he's like, a policeman telling, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. I want to pass this to this. He's the one who's sending the values from one place to the other. That's your role of the controller. What is the model doing? Model is representing what?
It holds
System
data
data.
of our system.
Somebody use the word entity. Yes, correct. Another word for class is your entity. So what is it representing basically?
Data in our system
The
and
data in the
actions.
system, and the methods that it has will be the actions that you can perform on that data. So that will be there in the model. Model will not automatically run. Controller will say, I want to use this model. I want to call this method. I want to use, this data from the model. And lastly, the view. What is the view dealing with?
Displaying
View
the
is what?
data.
Displaying the data from model.
Displaying the data, the user interface, what the user sees. All right. So let's quickly talk about each of these. Same thing that we talked about. I'm just putting into words, further words. The model in an MVC application represents the state of the application. The data is your state of the application, and any business logic or operations that should be performed on it. So business logic or operations are your methods. Business logic should be encapsulated in the model along with any implementation logic for persisting the state of the application. What do you mean by persist something?
Storing the data.
Yes.
Saving the data in
Correct.
database.
Saving the data.
Saving the state.
So typically, give me two options where you can save data. Give me two options where you can save data.
Database.
One is database. Anywhere else?
Serialization.
Yes. Where would serialization typically store it? Into a file. So persisting the state of the application. So where would you like to save it? And that's basically what you'd be doing. So next time when you read the value, you can read the value again. So all of this will be done by the model, the business logic, so to say. All right. Ignore the last line. Ignore the last line. I'll come back to the last line later. The view. What is the view doing? Views are responsible for presenting content through the UI. Okay. Now, typically in a web application, what would be your UI? You would actually be seeing HTML. So you would have HTML majorly, and along with this HTML, the HTML may not be statically generated. The HTML might be dynamically generated. I'll give you an example. Let's say if you open Gmail, you open your whatever mail application that you're working with. When you open Gmail, what do you first see? First page, what do you generally see?
Login page.
No, after logging. After logging. Inbox. What is there on the inbox? All the mails that you have received are there. Now, how is this? Everybody, each of you all will see different sort of mails out there. So how are you seeing this? What it is doing is it is reading from the database and it is generating that HTML code. So in a loop, it is saying read the values from the database, read what mails you have received and show them, one below the other, maybe in an HTML table, for example. Now this part of the code cannot be statically generated. So to do that, you will have to write some server-side code. And the server-side code will be generating the HTML for you. And this server-side code in ASP.NET MVC is written using Razor syntax. It uses what is known as Razor. The code that you write is called as Razor code, which is generating your HTML. Now this Razor code is parsed or is evaluated using something called as the Razor View Engine. So the Razor View Engine is responsible for running your Razor code. All right. Now the best part out here is that this Razor code that you're writing would depend upon the language that you're coding with. For example, if you're coding with C#, then the syntaxes that you will use in Razor code will be C# syntaxes. So everything that we have learned in C# from day one, everything, all concepts would be applicable when you are writing Razor code. All right. So when we have been coding since day one, we've been coding in console application, but all the concepts that we have learned there are going to be used out here. Okay. Everything that we've been doing so far is being used out here while writing your Razor code. All right. If you're coding in VB.NET, then the Razor View Engine also has a VB.NET, syntax. So depending, like if you're working with C#, then Razor View Engine will, you can write C# code for it. So that's the one that we'll be working with. Are we clear on this, everybody? Do you understand what is Razor code? What is Razor code? What is Razor?
So we need or we write Razor code to generate HTML dynamically.
Correct. Correct. So Razor code is effectively server-side code that you write that will run on the server and that will emit out HTML, that will give out HTML. Where would you need this? For situations where you want to dynamically generate HTML. I'm not talking about static HTML pages. I'm talking about pages which are dynamic. I gave you an example of the inbox that you see. The inbox that you see would be different from the inbox that somebody else sees. So that page is being dynamically generated, and that's what would be used using Razor code. Razor code uses, if you're working with C#, will use C# syntaxes. And the Razor code is evaluated using the Razor View Engine. So your view will consist of a combination of Razor code and HTML code. Are we clear on this, everybody? Both of which you already know. Both of which you already know. You already know HTML, right? And you already know C#. So writing this code is going to be very easy. All right. Now, while creating this, there should be minimum logic within views, and any logic in there should be related to presenting content. So, for example, now let's assume we want to read a value from the database. Now, this code should not be written in the view. Where should you be writing this value? Read the value from the database or save a value to the database. Where should you be writing this code?
Model.
In the model. We talked about this. So there should be a separation of concerns. Each one should do a particular task and do it well. View is responsible for what? View is responsible for what? For
showing the data.
Showing the data. So any logic related to showing the data should be there in the view. Who is responsible for reading the values, persisting the data? Who is responsible for that? Model is responsible. Right code there. Right? So MVC pattern, allows you to have this separation of concerns. Each one doing a particular task. Now I'll go back to the previous example. And that line which I had left out. I want to read that line. You have something called as a strongly typed view. So what is a strongly typed view? A strongly typed view is a view that receives data from a model. You could have a view which does not receive data from a model. But if you have a view that receives data from a model, this is called as a strongly typed view. So strongly typed view typically use view model types designed to contain the data to display on that view. The controller creates and populates this view model instances from the model. So we'll talk more about what are view models once we are in our code. At this point, I just wanted to explain to you the term called as a strongly typed view. So what's a strongly typed view? Basically, any view which is receiving data from a model. Okay. All right. The controller. The controllers are the components that handle the user interaction, work with the model, and ultimately select a view to render. We have said that before. In an MVC application, the view only displays information. The controller handles and responds to user input and interaction. So whatever request is being sent to the user is coming in via the controller. Whatever response is being sent back is also being done by the controller. All of this is being done by the controller. In the MVC pattern, the controller is the initial entry point and is responsible for selecting which model type to work with and which view to render. Hence, its name, it controls how the application responds to a given request. So same thing that we've been talking about, and same thing that we've been explaining in the previous slides. All right. So this is what I just wanted to, I'm sure you all knew about MVC, but just in case you all didn't know or had forgotten, this is what reinforcing the concepts. So now this is the way in which you're going to write it. So any question that you ask out there, why are we doing this? Or why are we doing this here? My answer is going to be separation of concepts. That each one should do a particular task and do it well. Right? So now that we have understood, a brief about what is M, what is V, and what is C, let's jump into our code. All right. You all can actually code this with me. In this example, I'm going to be doing a lot of talking and very little coding. So you all can actually do this one with me. All right. That will probably, hopefully, drive away some of the lazy Sunday, vibes that we have. Right, Nikita? So go in for Visual Studio, go in for creating a new project. Go in for creating a new project, but we're going to change this to web. So C#, Windows, web. All right. Now be careful about this because there are multiple options out here and it is very easy to choose the wrong project. Okay. So if you scroll down here, and look out for ASP.NET Web Application for .NET Framework. So in fact, when you look for this, look for .NET Framework. And it will then limit the choices that you have out there. Okay. So I hope you are doing this with me. Everybody, are you all with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going in that pace purposely. I'm going slowly at that pace because I want you all to do this with me. Just the initial project, just to get a feel of what's happening where. All right. So ASP.NET Web Application for the .NET Framework. That's the one that I'm selecting and choose next. Now I'm going to be placing this in a different folder. Okay. And I'm going to create a folder here called websites. So I'm going away from the day 1, day 2, day 3 format. And I will now create a folder called websites and keep uploading it there. The reason why I'm doing this is because on a given day, I may not finish the whole concept. So I will, continue with the concept the next day also. So websites is what I've called it. Place the solution and project in the same directory. We'll keep it at that way. And I'm calling it Web Application 1. That name I'm not changing. Okay. So this is what I've done. Location, I'm going to be storing it into a folder called website. So when I'm uploading my code also, please look at the websites folder for all the code that I'm uploading and create. Now, when you create this, there are different types of projects that you can create out here. So let me explain all these projects. Firstly, an empty project. If you select an empty project, then as the name suggests, it does not come in with any inbuilt code. It's an empty project. And then you have to go and add whatever you need out there. One by one, you'll have to add. So if you know how to work with things, and if you know how to add these on your own, then at a later point of time, you can go in for an empty project. For now, don't go in for an empty project, because then you will get lost in terms of what to do. What is the first thing to be done? The second project was Web Forms. So we were discussing Web Forms versus ASP.NET MVC earlier. So this is that older type of project called Web Forms. So again, I am not going to be covering Web Forms at all in our code. Okay, so we're not doing that. Now look on the right hand side. If it is an empty project, it shows an option here which says add folders and references for what. So it's not adding for anything. But if I say Web Forms, then it will add folders and references for Web Forms. Similarly, if I go in for MVC, then what has happened here? What has happened here? What has it taken? Add folders and references for MVC. So you can also do this. You can also go for empty project and add for MVC. This also you can do, right? And this is what you will do a little later once you are aware of few things. Right now, don't go in for this option. So we are choosing MVC. In fact, that's the one that I'm going to actually choose finally. Don't click OK or don't click create as yet. A little later, maybe 3-4 days later, we will look at Web API. So that's a different type of projects. I believe you all have created Web APIs in Java, correct? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So you all know what a Web API is. So I'm not going to Web API explanations right now. We will deal with it when we come to the topic later. And you can create also single page applications. So if you create a single page application, then the way in which you work with this would be slightly different again. So we are not, single page applications are not part of our course out here again. So we are going to be looking at MVC and Web APIs. Now, on the right hand side, it asks you for authentication. And there are different options that are given here for authentication. I will be covering authentication in a later session and how you can have authentication on your website. But for now, don't go in for that. Keep it as no authentication. This, of course, was selected for you by default when you selected MVC. There's a third option here, whether you want to configure for HTTPS. So deselect that. Do not configure for HTTPS right now. Otherwise, you'll have to provide a digital certificate. So initially, at least don't configure for that. Keep it deselected. Now, for the next couple of days, until I ask you to change, this is the type of project that you will be going in for. All right. So no changes required there. Later, we will change it and see other options out here. So no authentication. MVC, is the project type and it selects this for you by default. And do not configure for HTTPS. Okay. Create. Now this takes a few seconds, a good 15-20 seconds it takes to create the project. It's actually at this point, it's creating the project, it's adding all the code, it's generating all that code. All right. And a lot of things are different out here. So on slower machines, it might take even more time. Once it's finished creating the project, go into the Solution Explorer. Open the Solution Explorer. Right? Open the Solution Explorer and look at the references. Compared to what you had earlier, there are so many different more references that are added out here. So all these assemblies are also added by default. One of the references that we'll be referring to frequently would be system.web.mvc. Right, so you have that. Then you also have system.web.razor. This will be used for the razor syntaxes. Are we clear? And then you have web pages.razor, which is again a variation of that. But you have all of this. So system.web related, starting from here. In fact, system.net dot up to system.web dot. All of these are the additional libraries that you need for working with ASP.NET MVC. So all these references have been added for you by default. Okay. Look at the folder structure out here, and you will identify 3 folders for controller, for models, and for views. So MVC, those 3 folders are there. Now, as it suggests, all your controllers will add under controllers folder. All the models will add under models folder. And all the views we will add under the views folder. Right? So those are the 3 folders that you have. In addition to those folders, there are a few other folders out there. Let's examine what those folders do. You have an app underscore data. Now, if you have, you can have something called as an inbuilt database. So you can actually create SQL Server within this folder itself. And all such databases would be kept under app underscore data. This is meant for typically for SQL Server databases. There's an app underscore start, and we will look at this a little bit more in detail. So expand on that, app underscore start, and you have 3 files out here: bundleconfig.cs, filterconfig.cs, and rootconfig.cs. I'm going to open all 3 files in a short while, just immediately, right at the start. But remember that under app underscore start, and specifically look out for rootconfig.cs. Remember that there is a rootconfig.cs file that has been given. All right. And plus these 2 also. These 2 we will discuss in later sessions. What is bundling and what is filtering. But these are the files that have been created here in app underscore start. Expand the content folder. Now, I don't know what this is. Maybe you can, enlighten me on what these files are. Content folder. Can one of you tell me what these files are? I have never seen them before, but maybe you have.
So it is used for
Bootstrap
CSS.
files.
What is Bootstrap?
So used to design UIs.
Correct. So the code that it generates here by default is using Bootstrap. Right? And there'll be different elements in Bootstrap that you will apply out here. And based on that, your UI would change accordingly. Plus, there is a .css file, a site.css. So there are some inbuilt CSS elements again that have been classes that have been referred to in our code, in the code that it generates, which are being picked up from here. Right? So you would have the UI related, the CSS, the Bootstrap, all those files have been added out here. Okay. I am not going to explain this. I am presuming you know this well. Again, fonts that it's using. So different fonts that it's using in here. Those have been installed here. We'll come to controllers. We've got a long time to discuss controllers. The next one, can you expand scripts?
JavaScript.
What are these files used for? What are these files used for? Yes?
So for JavaScript, writing JavaScript.
For jQuery. So jQuery
Yes.
validations, for jQuery, some UI elements would be there with jQuery. For making asynchronous calls using jQuery. All of this code would be part of your scripts. you have Bootstrap script, you have jQuery script, all of these scripts are actually placed out here. So these have been added for you by default. There's an ICO file out there, which is the icon file. Ignore that. There is a web.config file, right? Now, as the name suggests, the configuration options for this application, web.config is the configuration application options for this would be given in the web.config file. This is a very, very important file. All the settings related to your application are given here in this web.config file. So we will be making changes in this as we go along. Not today maybe, but as we go along, we will be making changes in this file. We'll be adding entries in this file. And our application would read values from this web.config file. This is an XML file, right? And which has some code that is already generated for you. Don't touch that code, otherwise your application will behave differently. It will not work well. But we'll be adding more things out here. All right. Come to the global.asax file. And this global.asax file, take a minute to read through some of this. Right? Read what it says. So what is the method that it has in global.asax? Which method is this?
Application start.
Application start. Now this is the first code that runs when your application starts. Now, when does the application start? After you deploy your application. After you deploy your application. When the first request comes to your application, that causes the application to start. Right? And whatever initialization code that you want when the application starts would be put out here into application start under global.asax. Now, what are the things that it's doing? It's calling something called area registration dot register all areas. So in a MVC application, right now we're seeing all the code as written at one place. Now you might have areas in the application for logical breakup of your application into smaller sub applications. Like for example, you might have an admin area and a users area. So everything related to the admin would be done in the admin area. And everything related to the users would be done in the users area. I mean, in an application, right? I mean, you would have two sections generally in any application, wherein the admin logs in and performs a set of operations. And another is when the user logs in and performs a set of operations. Now, both of these would be separate operations. So when the admin logs in, then he's not going to do user operations. Or when the user logs in, he's not going to do admin operations. So you break up your application into smaller areas. So register all areas is all the areas that are given in here. I'll show you a little later how to create an area. But all the areas that are created here are now enabled and can be used in your application. That is the first part of the code. Secondly, filter config, root config, and bundle config. Do these look familiar? Do these names look familiar? Filter config, root config, and bundle config. Have you seen them somewhere before? We looked at app stack. And these are classes defined out there. Bundle config, filter config, and root config. So let's look at what it's doing. Filter config dot register global filters. So filter config dot register global filters. And this is the code that it's running out here. This function that it's running. So we'll see what are filters a little later in our code. right? You can create your own filters. So we'll see what filters are. I'm not discussing filters right now. But all that I'm telling you is that from application start, what are we first doing? Calling filter config.register global filters. Similarly, bundle config.register bundles. We'll go and call this code. So we will be learning about bundling a little later again. At that time, I will discuss this, but it's just simply calling this method out here. I am most interested in this third one, which is root config.register roots. Okay. Now, this is the first thing that happens when your application starts is that one of the things that happens is you're registering all the roots out here. So what is the root? What is the root that you're talking about here? A root is a valid URL that the application should be able to accept. When the user types out a URL and sends it to your application, what are the valid roots? What are the valid URLs? Will be decided by the roots that you specify. If you have not given any roots, nobody will be able to access your application. So how can the application be accessed? What is a valid URL for your application would be defined in a root. Right? So let's see what it's doing out here. In the root config.register roots, it's saying that this is the root that I want to register or I want to map, so to say. First thing is, what is the name of the root? Some name, any name. Name doesn't matter. XYZ could be the name of the root. Right? Secondly, and most importantly, what is the URL that you're using out here? So they're specifying a URL which says controller/action/ID, which means that while giving the URL, the user has to first specify the name of the controller, then give a slash, then give the name of an action. Now an action is a method defined in the controller. An action will be mapped to a method defined in the controller. So that's the second thing. What are the method in the controller that you're calling? Controller is going to be a class. We'll see the class controller in a minute. And thirdly, after the action, if there are any parameters to that method, what is the action actually? What is the action here? What is the action here?
Is a method.
Defined where?
In
the
controller.
In the controller. Now the method might have some parameters. So the parameters to that can be given out here. In the default root that they have specified, what are they saying? They're saying that you could have any controller name, you could have any action name, and one of the parameters of action, one of the parameters of that method is a parameter called ID. Is a parameter called ID. Are we clear on this, everybody? Now, they have also given some default values to this. They've given some default values to this. So what are they saying? What is the default controller? What is the controller, default controller?
Home.
Home. So they have created a controller called home and they're saying this will be the default controller. Okay. What if you want your controller to run and not the home controller to run? Then what you need to do? You'll have to come into this root config file and change this to the name of your controller. Right? Change this to name your controller. So you can change this. Don't be scared of changing anything. All right. Secondly, what is the default action that it's going to call?
Index.
Index. And the third thing, what are they saying? What are they saying about this third ID was going to be a parameter inside the action. So what are they saying now? ID is
Optional.
an optional parameter. So even if you don't give ID, your method should work. Are we clear on this? So this is what they've given out here. Okay. So initially, when the application started, when did the application start? When does the application start?
First request.
First URL request.
Correct. When the first user sends his first request, that's when the application start event would be started. That's when your application is set to have started. This will occur only once, right? Will not happen multiple times. When the application starts, what are the things that they're doing? They're firstly registering the filters, registering the bundles, and registering the routes. In the register route, what are the first thing they're saying? They're saying that this is the route that is a valid route. So any URL that is coming into your application, if it does not match this format, it will give you a 404. What are the 4? I'm saying 404, I mean a page not file
Page
not
not found.
right? It will give you a file not found error saying that I cannot understand your URL. So your URL has to match this pattern that you're defining. You can define multiple patterns. You can copy paste this and define multiple patterns. So you can say, okay, this is one pattern. I can define a second pattern, define a third pattern, and so on and so on. So whatever patterns you want to allow, you can allow. Are we clear on this, everything? All right. Let's just run this page. Let's just run this page. I've not looked at the controllers as yet. I've not looked there. Let's just run it. Just run it. Just run it. Okay. Now, when you run this, notice at the bottom out here, it is running in something called as IIS Express. You see look at the status bar at the bottom. What is it showing you there? It has started IIS Express. So IIS Express is a lightweight web server that is given to you with Visual Studio. When you're running your Visual Studio code, it is hosting it in IIS Express. This is good enough for development purposes. When you're doing development, this is good enough. But while doing deployment, you'll have to deploy it on another web server, on IIS. IIS is the web server typically where you would deploy this. All right. Okay, so now it's showing you some default page. So what you're seeing here is what do you get to see? Is it a model, controller, or a view?
View.
Right? So what you're seeing here is a view, the output of a view. Look at the URL on the top. Localhost is your current machine, colon, some free port number. Now your port number, my port number might be different. In my case, it's 51413. So it's picked up some default free port number and it's running it out here on that. Okay. Now you've seen what has been shown to you here. Let's see what exactly happened when you sent a request. When you ran it, it's actually sending a request. So let's see what has happened out here. Stop running it. And open the controllers folder. You'll find that there is one controller created for you called homecontroller.cs. Right? Just take a minute to read through that code. What is there in homecontroller.cs? Right? Firstly, you have a class home controller that inherits from where?
Controller.
The controller class. So all your controllers inherit from this controller class. The controller is system.web.mvc. That was the library that we saw some time back. System.web.mvc. This is where most of your code is. Dot controller. Okay. What are these? Index, about, and contact. What are these? Another word for these? Another word for these?
Actions.
Very good. These are your action methods. They're actually called, even if you say actions, you are correct. Actions also is the correct answer, but typically, another word of referring to them are, these are your action methods. Right? Okay. Now, if you look at root config, what did we say the default action was? We said the default controller was home. And the default action was what?
Index.
Index. So when you ran your code, what you're actually seeing is from the home controller, you're seeing the action, or you're seeing the index out here. Let's go to the index and see what is there. So here you have something called index, which is of type action result. All right. I'll explain action result in a minute. Code in there, it says return a view. Now the view that it's returning will be stored in the views folder. So the controller simply saying that whenever this index is being called, go and return a view out here. Let's open the views folder and see where the views are created. So you'll find that there's a folder here called home. Do you see the home folder under views? Right? Why is that folder called home? Any guesses? Why is under views there's a folder called home? Why is it called home?
Because of the home controller.
It is handling request from home controller.
Because by default, there was a controller called home controller. The controller called home controller. So there will be a folder under views for this home controller. Now, please pay careful attention to the naming convention. While naming it, you will add the suffix of controller. You will add a suffix of controller. So you will not just call this class as home. You will not call it home. What will you call it? Home controller. But while referring to it in this code, you will drop the controller suffix. And you will refer to it only as what?
Home.
Home. Only the first part there. So supposing I want to create a controller called XYZ controller. While creating the class, my class will have to be called what? What will this class be called in this case? XYZ controller. Right? But while referring to it in its code or anywhere else, you will only call it XYZ. Okay? So look at the views. Under home, you have 3 views created out here. What are the 3 views? Index, about, and contact. And these 3 views match with the names that you're given to your action methods. So the index action method has a view called index. The about action method has a view called about. And the contact action method has a view called contact. Are we clear on this? So this matches with that. Now, when we say in our code here, return view, in the index code, when we say return view, what is it returning out here? It's looking out for a view called index, and it's returning that view. Returning this view. So this is what you're seeing, index. This is what you're seeing. This is what you're seeing out here. All right? This is what you're seeing out here. Now, when does this happen? When does this happen? When you run it. Okay, now look here, look at my screen when you run. Don't look at your screen, look at my screen. When you run it, what you're seeing actually is home/index. What you're seeing is home/index. Why am I seeing home/index? Why am I seeing home/index?
Because we have mentioned in default URL.
Because the default controller is home and the default action is index. Now, what is the URL that it expects? What is the URL that it expects? Controller / action, and then ID is optional. So ignore ID for now. But what is required will be what? Controller / action. So see what I'm doing out here. I'm saying /controller / action. I'm giving it as index. What would happen if I say this page? If I give this page, which page will I get to see? Sorry,
Same
controller,
page.
I gave it as controller. This should have been what?
Home control.
Home.
Home.
Home/index. Which is the page that you will see when you say home/index? Which page would you see?
Same page.
Same page.
Same page.
Same
Current
page?
page.
Same page? Yes. Why same page? Why same page?
Default URL.
Because that is the default option there. So yes, you are seeing the same page. What if I give only home? Only home. What would I get to see?
Sir, action
Same
is
page.
necessary, right? Action is necessary, compulsory.
No. Action also had a default value.
Right.
ID was
Then
ID was
same.
optional. Action had a default value. Home had a default value. So my question again is, if I give only home, what would I get to see?
Same page.
Same
page.
page. Sir, same page will be shown
Correct.
because
Or
by default index is added.
perfect. Or if I don't give anything also, what am I getting to see?
Still same page.
Same page. Now, how do I see the about page? Or how do I see the contact page? What would I need to do for the about page?
Home/above.
Home/above.
/home/about.
About.
Or the contact page. Or the contact page. And which you can also see from here. If you click on these links, they have also created links for you to go to the other pages. And if you click here, they're taking you to the home page. Or about or contact. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is how this is actually running. There's a lot more I want to talk with you all, and a lot more that I want to explain, and a lot more that we want to do. But we are about halfway through our session. Right? So let's take a break at this point, and we will continue with that after a break. Now, when I started my session in the morning, all of the people in the morning said, the people who logged in early said, sir, we don't need a break. You just continue without a break. 3-hour session only, we can sit through it. No problem at all. Majority of the people said that. Those who logged in later didn't hear it. But I said, no, let's take a break. We'll not take a long break. We'll take a short break, but we'll take a break. So let's take a 10-minute break and we will continue with the session. 11:15, we will start. I don't want to not give a break. I mean, people just saying no break. And we don't want to do that. We'll take a 10-minute break and we'll start off again. Okay. So 11:15 we start.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So at the start out here in index.cshtml, you have an @ and then curly brackets. So what you see here is this is a Razor code block. Right? And of course, we'll write more complex code blocks, but this is one simple, there is just written one line of code, viewback.title equal to home page. So whatever code that you write in here would be written in C#. This is C# syntaxes. So whatever C# you have learned, now you can use them out here. And this is how it's going to be actually found out here. So as we go along, and this is just the simple hello world type example. As we go along, you will be writing a little bit of Razor code yourself. If you look at these are all, you know, Jumbotron, for example. What is this? This is actually coming in from Bootstrap, right? These are all Bootstrap related UI things. Okay, I'm not explaining all of that. Now, this is what it shows. So what is the first thing it starts with? H1, right? ASP.NET, and then it shows you ASP.NET is a free web framework, so on and so forth. And the last line here is whatever, web hosting, and then you can find a web hosting company here and whatnot. So this is the index page that has been written out here. But when we run this, let's say we go to the home controller and we run this, see whether that is exactly the same thing that's coming out, or whether there's something extra additional that is also being added. Just see the output that you get and compare it with what you saw here in the index.cshtml page. So this is what we had in the index.cshtml page, and this is the output. So what is the first thing that in here, line number 6, what is the first thing that we had here? Was ASP.NET in the H1. So this is where it is. But this page also has what?
No.
It has those links. It has a option of going to the other thing. And look at the last line out here. Was related to web hosting, and you can find whatever that message out there. So this is here. But after that, again, what do we have here? An @ whatever 2022 and MyASP.NET application. So you had some code right at the beginning and some code right at the end, which is not coming from index, right? So where is this code coming in from? Because if index is not having it, how is this code coming in from? So let's examine this. Same way, I mean, if I'll show you again, let me show you the about page. This is the about page. Okay, let me show you the about page here. If you open the about page, this is all that the about page contains. But when you look at it here, in addition to these things, it has got something on top and something below it also. So all the pages have that extra information at the beginning and end. So where is this coming in from? Let's try and understand this. All right. So if you go into the views folder, do this on your machine as well. Go to the views folder, and there is a shared folder under the views folder. So you have a folder called home, and what will home contain? What does home contain?
So all the 3 CS HTMLs.
All the views required for home, right? All the views required for home. But there's an additional folder called shared, right? Expand that shared folder. And one of the files there is _layout.cshtml. Do you see that file? _layout.cshtml.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now before we open that file, look below that. Below the shared folder, there is a _viewstart.cshtml. So open the _viewstart.cshtml. Open that file, and there's one line in there saying that layout is equal to, look at what does tilde out here indicate? What does this first starting tilde indicate? What does tilde mean? In HTML, what does tilde mean? What does tilde mean? In HTML, when you give a path, what does the tilde mean? That's TILD, tilde, whatever you want to call it. What does that mean?
So maybe it is saying that any path that has this pattern.
Directory name? Tilde represents the root directory, root folder. So this is my root folder. Under the root folder, I have a folder called, if this is the root folder, Under the root folder, I have a folder called views. Under views, shared, and under shared, underscore layout.cshtml. This is what is referred to as an absolute path, which starts from your root folder. So wherever you are, you can give this path. So underscore layout.cshtml, that is the file that it's using. That is the layout that it's using. All right. Open underscore layout.cshtml. Open this. And this here is the common layout that will be used by all the views. So what goes into that? See, any HTML page, if you looked at the view, it didn't start with HTML. Any HTML page starts with what? With HTML. But it's not started with HTML. Look at that view. All that information has come in the underscore layout. That is the common layout for all views. So where does it start with? Doc type HTML, HTML head, all right, all your, what do you want to give in the title, what do you want to give, what styles or render, which CSS file to use, and then styles or render, there's something called bundling that we talked about. So in the bundling, it's creating a file called modernizer and so on and so forth. And then here is where your head ends and the body begins. And this here, right? This here is where those links were created. So what are the links created? First one, there was a link for application name. Secondly, there were links for what? Home, about, and contact. You see the UI that was created for you when you ran this. So this first link, line number 19, this is this one, application name. And the other links, what are these links for? Home, about, and contact. These links have been created here. Okay. Now, after these links are over, where is this section coming in from? Where is this section coming in from? All of this HTML code, where is this coming in from?
Home. About
Index.
index.
You will get there eventually. Okay. Sunday morning is okay. So index is where this is all coming in from. Or if you're looking at about, where is this coming in from? This part is coming in from where? From about. So if you notice the above section, the section on top has come in from the layout page. Then somewhere in there, it is getting the information from either the index page or the about page or the contact page. I should say the contact view or the about view or the home view. All right, home is index actually. So this is where it's giving it from. So how does that come in out here? Look at this line. Line number 31. Render body, @render body. So @render body is now getting the code from the index view and pasting it out here. What is @render body doing? Getting the values from the index and pasting it out here. So it is actually doing something like this, right? Or if I was looking at, let me show you the about page or any of the other pages. Supposing I was doing the about page, what was it doing? This code is actually coming and being replaced here. This is how it's looking. So it's a direct substitution. @render body is a direct substitution. That code is being inserted here. And finally, this is the page that you get to see. Are you clear on how this page is being formed? Yes. Are you clear on how this page has been formed?
Yes, sir.
All right. So after the render body is over, what is there at the bottom? What is this showing you? What is this showing you? The current date, it was showing the @ one, 2022. And then my ASP.NET application. So what you saw at the bottom was this code out here. So the layout page is used to give a common look and feel to all pages. Whatever is the common look and feel will go on the layout page, and whatever is different on the other pages will come in here. So whatever you're calling with @render body, the code that is there on your common page will be brought out. This is how you will go ahead and create different layouts out. Are we clear on this, everybody? So one of the to-dos to do at the end of the day, right? Not here, not right now. At the end of the day, I think you'll have an aptly session after that, and whenever you get the lab time. One of the things that you have to do here is you have to create your own layout. So you'll have to create your own layout. Where would you create your own layout? Where would you create it? In which folder can you create the layout? In the shared folder, right? Now, how will you ensure that your layout is being called? Where would you go and give that? Saying that your layout should be called. We'll go and give that in the viewstat file. So in the viewstat file, instead of using _layout.cshtml, you'll have to use your layout. And in your layout, you can put whatever code. You need not even have very complex code. You can put a very simple code, very simple layout you can create. In your layout, somewhere in your layout, what must you enter? What line must you write? @render body.
Render body.
And when you write this render body, the code from the HTML code from the view would be picked up and placed in place of render body. All right. Now see what happens if I don't give render body. If I don't give render body, I'm not giving render body. What happens then? Let's see what happens then. All right. So what is the error out here? Saying that the render body method has not been called for the layout page. So the layout page requires that you must call what? The render body method. That's the first thing. Second thing, let's try this again. Let me call render body twice. Let me call it twice. So what should happen now? 2 times it will show up, right? Let's see what happens when I call it twice. See what happens when I call it twice. What is the problem here? What are the exception here now?
HTTP exception.
What is it saying? What is the message saying? That the render body has already been called. So you cannot call render body more than once also. Right? So your render body must be called exactly once in your layout page. And render body is where your other code is being pasted from. Important to remember. Question would be asked on render body. All right? Okay. So you understood the layout page, everybody? Have you understood what is the layout page? What do you use a layout page for? For a common look and feel. It would be given out there. Okay. All right. Let's come back to the controller. Okay. I don't want, when I run this, I don't want index to run first. I want about to run first. Where would I need to make a change? I don't want index to run first. I want about to run first. Where would I make a change?
Default URL.
Where would I do that?
Root config.cs.
Root config.cs. So remember this root config, it's an important file. So here, for example, instead of action equal to index, I came and gave an action equal to about. So when I run this now, whenever I run this now, by default, what will happen now? It will take which page now? The about page. All right. So you could change it, and please feel free to change it. Every time you want to run this, you would like to run a different page as the startup page, you can do that, saying that, okay, this is what by default would come up if nothing is given. All right, let's try creating our own routes. Okay, before we do that, let's try creating our own controllers. We have used the default controller here. Let's try creating our own controller. So help me, what do I do? Right click on controllers and add a controller. Right click on controllers, do that with me. Right click on controllers and add a controller. Now it's giving you three options out here. It's saying either you can add an empty controller, and that's the one that we're going to go for, or you can add a controller with some existing code already written in there. So with read-write actions, that is the second option that you can have. So we'll look at that a little later. That is called something called as scaffolding. We'll look at what is scaffolding a little later. And the third option, what is that using? Third option, what is that using? MVC controller with views using entity framework. What is that option using? Entity framework, do you remember? I've mentioned that before, specifically when we are talking about link, I had mentioned that. So do you remember what's the entity framework? No? Entity framework is an ORM tool, just like, you know, you would have used Hibernate, for example. Just like that, you can use entity framework, and where you don't have to write the code. So the entity framework generates most of the code, and then it can interact with the database. So without you writing any database code, without you doing anything, the entity framework would do that for you. Yeah, and that's the one that we could be using. We'll use that in a later exam. For now, we are going in for an MVC controller, which is empty. Choose OK, add. What is the naming convention that you have to use out here? What is the naming convention that you have to use out here? Must have what? Every controller that you create must have what?
Controller word at the end.
Suffix controller.
A suffix of controller. A suffix at the end of your this thing. So supposing you want to create a controller called default controller. The controller name is default, but while naming it, you have to name it as default controller. If it was called XYZ, XYZ controller. If it was called employees, employees controller. Whatever the controller name must have controller at the end of it. Please note it down and remember this, because this is one of the common errors that, you know, I find people are getting errors because they have not done this. So please note it down and please remember this. While naming the controller, give a suffix of controller. Unfortunately, I have a lot of years of experience of dealing with not just CDAC, but other batches. Now, I am telling you to write it down because I know for sure that somebody is going to make a mistake on that. Yes, sir, my code is not working. And I'll say, okay, your controller name is wrong. I'll say, okay. Yeah. Don't make that mistake. I told you all in the database code. I request you with folded hands. Please name your database, name your tables, name your columns the same as what I am having, so that you don't need to change your code. I didn't fold my hands, but I said, if you want, I will fold it. And I requested you with this phrase, with folded hands. In spite of that, there are some geniuses who have given different names. So when I'm telling you something, it is not because I think you are fools, because I have seen earlier batches, people making these common mistakes. So I have been teaching for longer than some of you all have been born. Most of you all have been. So when I'm telling you something, it is not that just randomly saying some shit about, oh, okay, fine. So what? There is a meaning in that. There's a reason why I'm telling you this. The reason why I'm telling you, why I'm spending 5 minutes on something as simple as saying that please give the name controller at the end of it to avoid problems in your code later. which you will face. All right. So please write it down and please remember to give a suffix of controller. Do not forget that. I'm creating it with the default thing. Default controller is what it created. Go ahead, create it. Say okay in case you haven't said okay. So this class, of course, inherits from the controller class. Okay. It inherits from the controller class. Instead of returning an action result, I'm going to return a string. So public string index, and instead of returning a view, I'm going to return a hello world. This is the first thing that I'm doing out here. A simple controller which is returning a hello world. Okay, this is the code that I've changed. So what have I changed here? Instead of action result, I've just said return a string. And return what? A hello world from there. If you want, you can add some HTML to it, make it bold or whatever else that you want to add. You can do that if you want. Right? Let's say bold /p, whatever. If you want to add that, you can do that. Now, how do I get this one to run? If I run this by default, what is it running? By default, what is it running? By default, which is the default URL it's
Home
taking.
controller.
Home/index is what it's taking. So if I want this one to run, give me the options. What can I do? What can I do? One possibility is yes. How do I get mine to run?
So with like root config.cs,
No,
or
without that.
otherwise
Here in the URL, what will you give?
we can rewrite the URL instead of
Give me
home. We
what
can
the
write
URL would be.
default control default.
Right. So you would say /default/index, and that would give you this. Other option you could also do is what? You could remove the index and you could just simply say default. Why? Why would this simply say default? Why would this also work? Why would default also work?
Default action is index.
Because the default, let me not say the word default. Because if you don't give anything, then it takes it index on its own. So that's how it's taking this. If I don't give the word default, then what will it take? Then what will it take? Home. What if you want to make this thing run first? You don't want home to run first. You want this to run first. Then what do you do? Then what is the option available to you? You go to root config and you change instead of home, you write this as what? As default. So get comfortable with doing this. Don't feel lost while doing this. You should know how to get your URL that you want. Now, have you all run it once? Just run it once quickly. I'll wait 30 seconds while you run it. Quickly run it. Just try running default and see the output that you're getting is index. Somebody's mic is on. Unless you're asking a question, please turn it off. All right. Thanks for the feedback of done. So that's what you're done. Now, although I can do something like this is something I'll never do. Why is this something I'll never do? Why should I not, for example, from the controller itself, throw back some HTML? I can do this if I want to, but why is this approach, fundamentally wrong? What have we been saying so far with an MVC thing? What would you be doing?
Separation concern.
Separation of concern. So the UI should not be handled by the controller. The controller will be responsible for receiving the request and sending back the response. But the UI part of it would be done by the view. So although this can be done, this is not how you should be doing it. Because then you are mixing and matching code and it's very difficult to keep track of such code. So what does this return? Now we want to return a view. All right. So there's a class called view result. right? There's a class called view result, and I can actually return a view result, right? I could do this. Here in this case, I could say return view. So look at what view is. Can I ask you to look at the screen for a second? Look at what view is. View is of what type? View here is of what type? Is of type view result. Okay. So we are actually returning a view result. And this is okay. This code would work perfectly okay. No problem whatsoever. But as we go along with more complex code, you may have a situation wherein you're either returning a view or returning something else other than a view. Maybe a 404, maybe a HTTP status code, maybe some, situation where you want to go to another view. We don't want to write down the code here. We want it to go to another method, and we are sort of redirecting to another method. So there will be different return values as you go along. Right? Not in this code, not in today's code, but as we go along in our code. Now, in which case, for example, if you're returning a 404, you're returning a not found. Okay, you're returning a not found. So there's something, for example, if you said return HTTP not found, which is of type HTTP not found result. Okay. So let's assume you're doing this. Now, why would this code not work? Why would this code not work?
Because I am returning view result.
Because it expects a view result. But now this would not work. Now, what is the solution to that? How do you solve this problem? Let's look at what view result is. View result is a class out here. All right. So if you look at view, return view, view is of type view result. So if you go to the view result is a class that inherits from view result base. And this class itself inherits from action result. This class itself inherits from action result. Okay. Now, if you look at HTTP not found, this is of type HTTP not found result. And if you look at HTTP not found result, this inherits from HTTP status code result. And if you look at this inherits from again where? This return inherits from action result. So action result is the base class of all your returns. All the different things that you can return, all of them inherit from action result. Therefore, instead of writing code like this, it says return view result of index. Even this code works here in this context. A better option is to do what? Return action result of index. So action result is the base class of all other things that you might return from here. And by giving the base class now, you can pass it any object. So for example, if I had done this, then this code would work fine. Then this code would work fine. Why would this code work fine? Because HTTP not found inherits from HTTP not found result, which somewhere down the line goes and inherits from action result. Are we clear on this, everybody? Therefore, all the code that it generates for you is returning what? What is this returning? And action. And now in your code, you can decide what you want to return, whether you want to return a view or any other types. And these other types we'll see as we go along in our code. Okay? Are we clear on this, everybody? Questions, if any? Okay, so to do for you, I said we'll be looking at action results between now and the end of the course. find out as many classes as you can find out of which are derived classes of action design. To do for you, find out what are the derived classes of action design. Okay, and I will quiz you on it tomorrow. So I don't expect you to write any code. I'm just asking you find out. If you even do a simple Google, it will give you a list of action result derived classes. So what is the name of the class and what does it return? That is what I'm going to ask you tomorrow. Let's see how many of you can figure that out on your own. All right. Okay, so this is what we are doing. Could I have returned a view out here? Okay, I think I did mention that you can return any other view. So if you had to return a different view, then you can do that. If I run this right now, if I run this code right now, and let's say my root config, can I change this to default with your permission? Can I change it to default here? What is the advantage of changing it to default here? Why
You
would I
don't
want
have
change
to rewrite the URL.
I don't have to every time go and change the URL on top. When I run it directly, it will run this here. So with your permission, I've changed this to default. And if I run this code right now, what would happen? If I run this code right now, what would happen?
Or not.
Will it work? Will it not work? Should work, right?
It will work.
Should work. So why is it not working? Why is it not working? What is the problem in this code? What is the problem in this code? What is it telling you? What is it
So
telling
there
you?
is no view as index in default.
Correct. By default, it will use or it will try to look out for a view out there having the same name as your method. My method name was index. Do we have a view called index? Do we have a view called index?
Say in home, but not in default.
So we have this thing called index, but which is in home. If you look at the Solution Explorer, it is there in home, but under default there's nothing. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do for this code to work?
So create an index.cshtml in default.
Correct. So we'll need to create a view in under the default folder. Now see how I can do this. Please do this with me. Have you written down this code already? If not, quickly write it down. 10 seconds to write it down quickly. If you're not written down, please write this down. Yeah, done. All right, now I'll show you how to generate a view from here. Right click on this method, right click on index and choose add a view. Right click on index and choose add a view. When you choose that, it will prompt you again for what type of view you want to add. Okay, what type of view you want to add. So it's showing you an MVC view. Just say add. Just say add. It'll further prompt you. It will further prompt you. Key, first thing, what is the view name? So do you want to change the view name from index? Do you want to change it? Or should we keep it index? Yes, keep it index only or change it?
It's the same.
Same. Why same? Why same? Because we are only saying return view. If you give a different name, then while calling return view, what you need to do? You need to pass the name of the view out there. So if you don't do that by default, it should keep the same name. Secondly, what template should it use? So we talked about a strongly typed view. what is a strongly typed view?
So which deals with models.
Correct.
view and
A
model.
view which receives data from some model. That's a strongly typed view. Now, right now, I am not introducing models. In the first few examples, I'm not dealing with models at all. I'm only dealing with controllers and views. We will see models. Definitely, we have to see them, but a little later. So you have in here, you have different types of views that are there. You got different types of views. Now, one of the types of views that you have is without a model, the empty one without a model. That's what you have. All the others require a strongly typed view, a view that uses a model. So I'm not using a strongly typed view in this example. So the only option available to us is the empty view without a model. Okay. It next asks you for the model class. So again, as I said, no models in this example. Look at the options below. Do you want to create it as a partial view? A partial view is a concept that I'm going to cover in a later session. So for now, don't choose partial view. For now, don't choose partial view at all. Probably in tomorrow's session, we'll see what a partial view is. The next option, do you want to use a layout page? Do you want to use a layout page or not? And in this, I will say, don't use a layout page. Don't use a layout page. All right? Don't use a layout page. So I'm creating a, this is the simplest type of view that we will create, which is not a typed view, which is not a strongly typed view, which is not using any model, which is not a partial view, and which is not using a layout page. And say, okay, add. Say add. Say add. Now, what does it generate for you? What code does it generate for you here? Yes,
HTML.
HTML
code.
with the head, body, and you're supposed to write in the code. Now, I'm not going into this, but I mean, you can put in whatever you want out here. Okay, whatever you'd like to display, you can display out here. What happened? Right? Put in whatever HTML, and don't look at me for the HTML. I don't know HTML. You all have learned HTML. You all know HTML. I don't know any HTML. Okay, so I'm not going to help you with any HTML. All right. Now would it run? Now would it run? Yes. Now would it run? Should run. We have given it a view. In the default, we have given it a index.cshtml. Let's try running this and see whether you get the view that you are looking for. Right? So that's what you got out here. Now, this was a view that did not use the layout. So what happened? Everything you have to put in the view yourself. Correct? You have to go and write down all the code yourself. If you look at the view source, right click and view page source, whatever you have given in there, that is actually coming here. Okay? So this is the first view that we create. Let's try creating another view. Index 2, let's say. Index 2. How do I create a view for this? Guide me through creating a view. Guide me for creating a view. What would I do?
So right click on index 2.
Right click and add a view. Please do this with me. We'll do this together. Right click and add a view. When you add a view again, which view are you choosing? There's no option actually. I don't know why they show you the screen. You have to choose the one option that they show you. So choose add. Again, without model. Again, without model. But this time, choose use a layout page. Choose use a layout page. Now look at the bottom in what instruction it's giving you. What is it saying? Leave it empty if it is set in a underscore viewstat file. You remember the underscore viewstat file? Sometime back we had gone and seen that underscore viewstat.cshtml. There was an instruction which said that it should use that underscore layout.cshtml. Okay, I don't know whether you remember. I'll show you again. But we do have a viewstat file, and in the viewstat file we are telling it which layout to use. So it's saying if you've already given that instruction in the viewstat file, then leave it blank. So I'm leaving it blank. I'm not doing anything out here. I'm saying okay, add. Now what is the difference between the earlier one and this one? The earlier one and this one. What is the difference between the two? Between the two views?
First one has a boilerplate.
First one has.
Boilerplate.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you clearly. First one
Boilerplate.
has what?
Boilerplate.
Boiler page. Okay. Right. Use simpler terms that I can understand. You're right, but can you use simpler terms that I can understand? You're right. I'm not saying you're wrong.
HTML tags and head tags.
Correct.
Body
So
tag.
it has all the code for including doc type, HTML, header, and so on and so forth. And if you see, it's not using any layout. There's a line in there which says layout equal to null. But the other page that we created does not have that boiler page code, does not have that HTML code that was generated there, and it is not given which layout to use. Now, which layout is it using? By default, where is it using the layout from? From this viewstat file. So if you open viewstat file, underscore viewstat file, what is it saying? Which layout should it use? You remember this instruction or no? I showed you this earlier some time back. So it's saying what? That it should use this layout. So this is the default layout that it would use. Which layout? Underscore layout.cshtml, which we saw again some time back. This is all that code in. So now my index 2 is using underscore layout.cshtml. Right? Now, how do I run this index 2? One way is I can run that and I can type the URL out there. One way is I can do that. Now see what happens when I'm on the index page. I'm on the index page. And if I try running this, which one is it taking me to by default? By default, what is it taking
Index
me to?
2.
Index 2.csv. So if I'm on that page, on that view, then it will take me to that view. Okay. And do you see this, how it looks different from index? Index was this, which is not using the layout, and index 2 is the one that is using the layout. So you decide whether you want to use a layout, not use a layout. You can create pages set. Are we clear on this, everybody?
So
Yes.
when I right click that index, the add view page is not highlighted.
Are you running your page? If you're running your page, then it will not be highlighted.
Okay, okay, sir.
Stop running it and then try the same.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Are we clear on this, everybody?
So can you repeat the last line you said that it will go to the same, like
If you're
say
if you're
it will
open
use the
this
same.
page, if you're open this page, see if I'm on the controller, if I'm on the controller, then it will take up what you're given in root config. If you're taken up, it will take up that. But if you're on that view, then whichever view you are on, it will by default show you that view. So now it's not taking the one in, your root config. It's not taking that. It's taking this specific view.
Okay, sir.
All right. This is one more way of doing this. You can right click on the view and say view in browser. Even this you can do. Even if you're not on the view, you can right click and view in browser. Even this you can do. So even this will work. Right? But these two approaches that we use, what are the last two approaches? We said we can go to the view and directly run it, or we can right click and say view in browser. When you do that, then debugging is disabled. You cannot go stepwise in your code, and later we'll see we will need debugging also. So better option always is, I've always told you, I don't know why, in fact, when you all in the lab session, you all have got into this nasty habit of running without debugging and not knowing where the error occurs. Do not ever run your code without debugging. Always run your code with debugging. Debugging is the most important tool that a programmer can ever have. If your code is not working, then we need to know what line gave an error. I get frustrated with you all when you are running with the control F5. Do not run it by saying run without debugging. You have to run it with debugging. So here also, now if you go to that page directly and then you run it, then debugging is disabled. And you will need debugging as you go along. It's important that debugging is enabled to find out how your page is running, why it's working, why is it not working. All right, so this is what we have done next. We have seen how to add. What have we added right now? We have added, this was, first one we added was, first page was, this was without layout. Second one which we added was with default layout. Where is the default layout given? In which file is it given?
View start.
Right? Okay, let's try creating a third one. And index 3, I'm calling it. I'm running out of meaningful names. Let's call it index 3. And this one I will give with a specific layout. Okay. Which can be any layout. All right. This is what we'll be doing. So let's say again how we do this. Devi, is your problem solved? You asked that to not working.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I closed that and it worked.
Yeah. Okay. So right click on index 3 and choose add view. Right click on index 3 and choose add view. Again, MVC 5 view, add that. And this time we will go and give our own layout page. So don't leave it blank. Don't leave it blank. Instead, what will we do? Select this and go and give your own layout page. Now, have you created a layout page so far? You haven't. So later, I've told you one of the to-dos is you have to create your own layout page. So for now, because we have not created our own layout page, I will pick up the one which is already created, layout.cshtml. I'll pick this up. But supposing you had a second layout page, layout2.cshtml. Supposing you had that, then what could you do then? You could go and specify which one you want. And when you do this, it adds this line for you. And assuming it was layout 2, then you would have picked up layout 2 and add that. Now, when you add this, again, you'll notice that it does not come with the boilerplate template. I like that word. Okay. It does not come in with your default HTML code that is coming out there. But there's an extra line added here, which is saying what? Layout equal to whatever layout. So now this could have been layout 2, for example. This could have been layout 2. Right? I don't have a layout 2, but this could have been layout 2. Now this will overwrite the setting given in viewstat.cshtml. So viewstat.cshtml is a default view, but this now is overwriting that setting and saying now use a particular view out. Okay, and let's try running this. I'm right now running it without debugging, of course. But now if you find that again, index 3 is using the layout that you have specified, whatever the layout. Are we clear on this side? Questions again? So this is how you can create pages with layouts, without layouts, with a specific layout. All right. Okay. What would you put in the view itself? What you put in the view is your lookout. I'm not going to even look at that. Okay. Let's take the next example. And so far we've been working with only the controller and the action. We've only been looking at these two options. Let's look at the third option now. Okay, what if you wanted to pass a parameter to that function? Now, what have they given out here? What are the URL? What is the format of the URL? First is you can pass what? First part of that URL. I mean, of course, the IP address should be there. So localhost colon whatever that at server address should be there. Followed by what? Controller name. Followed by what? Followed
Action.
by the name of that method, action method name. Followed by what? This currently options. You're not forced to do that. Followed by what? Followed by
URL, ID, URL.
ID. So ID here will be a parameter that you will have in your action method. So you will have to actually create a parameter called ID. This name can be anything. It can be A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, whatever name you want to give. It doesn't have to be called ID. It can be called any name. They have given it a name called ID. I'm keeping the same name. But can I change it if I want to? Can I change it if I want to? Yes. Perfectly okay to change it. So the variable that I'm using here is ID. Right? Let's go into the code and try doing this. So I'm going to create another method. Let's call this index4. And this one has an ID as a parameter. This one has an ID as a parameter. So all these methods so far did not take an ID. This one did. This one did. Okay. Now, what I do with the ID, we'll see later. How that ID will be used, I will see later. Firstly, let me just put a breakpoint and show you how the ID comes in here. Okay. So when I run this now, let's try running this. Let's see what happens. Which one is it going to run by default? First, by default, which will it run? By default, it will run what?
Index.
Index. So let it run index first. Let it not cause a problem with the index. So this showed you default / index. Now from default / index, I'm going to default / index 4 / index 4. And along with it, what am I passing to it? I'm passing it some ID. ID here in this case, I'm passing it as 10. Okay. So the last part of your URL now contains the ID. Let's see what happens when I press enter here. So when you press enter, that's when the request is going in. And that's when this method has got called. So you'll find that ID has now received the value of 10. Okay. Now what I do with the 10 is secondary. I will do something with the 10. But what I do with it right now, I'm not worrying about it. Right now, I'm just saying return view. And this is what it. Okay. Why is it giving an error? What did I miss out on doing? What have I not done?
View.
Added a view. So let me add a view. Okay. I will not use a layout page and add a view. So this is what I have out here. Okay. This is what I am having in the view. So let's try running this again. Let's come back to this. So initially, of course, index ran, then / default / index 4 / 10 as the ID. Now when I pass 10, this is what is coming here. ID is coming here as 10. and I continue with this and my page is shown. Of course, the page right now is blank. There's nothing in the page. Right? I haven't written anything in there. But this is what has actually happened right now. Okay. Now, what if I'll remove the breakpoint. Breakpoint is just to show you what is the value in there. What if now I tried doing this /index 4, but I don't pass it an ID. Any guesses what would happen? What could happen here? I'm not passing it an ID. What would happen?
Any default value.
It's a error. Hey, that is-
Okay, let's see. It says that I did not get a value for ID. I did not get a value for ID. So which means now nothing was passed as ID. Now somebody gave me a hint and somebody said that maybe it should take some default value. Now have we written code? You're writing C# code. Have you written any code to give it a default value? Have you given it any code to give a default value?
No.
For this function, does it have a default value? Yes or no? Does this have a default value?
No, sir.
No, sir. No,
So how will it automatically get a default value?
We can write
If
ID.
you want to give it a default value, you need to pass it a default value. So you could get it to work. One possibility is what? You could pass it a 0. And what will be the value now? If nothing is passed, then what? If nothing
Then
is
0.
passed, then what? Okay, still
Then it will take ID as 0.
It'll take ID as 0. So let's try running this. Now again, let's try running it and not pass it. So initially what happened? It gave you an error. It said, I didn't get anything for ID. ID must be passed. Let's try doing this without giving anything right now again. And index 4 is what I'm calling, but not passing it an ID. So what did it now take a value? It didn't give an error now. What is the value now in ID? We'll take it as 0.
Sir, you are on mute. Mic button is pressed, sir.
Not audible.
Mic but
Okay,
yes,
yeah,
sir,
yeah.
now.
Okay, now can you hear me? I think I pressed the F4 key by mistake. F4 function key on my this thing muted
Yes,
my
sir.
mic. Now hopefully you can hear me. If
Yes,
I
sir.
was in your place, I would have just said, no, we can't hear you, end the session. So look at the smile it brought to some of your faces. And that's what that's, like, oh no, missed it. Okay. Coming back to this. So we have what? We have, what if I don't pass it a value is what I'm trying to say. What if I don't pass it a value? Now what value will it take? Now what value will it take if I don't pass it a value?
0.
Yes, it'll take a 0. So this took a 0. And what if I passed it a value of 0? Then what value will it take? What if I
0.
pass it a value of 0? Then what value will it take?
0.
Again 0. Right? Again the value here would be 0. Now my question to you is, in your code, how will you know the difference between that the user has passed you a 0 or the user has not passed you a 0 and it has taken a value of 0? Will you be able to distinguish between these two? will you be able to distinguish between these two? Yes or no? Can you distinguish between these two? Between receiving nothing and getting a default value of 0 or receiving 0? Is there any way of figuring it out? Difference between the two?
Using if else.
Sorry?
If else.
But what if else? This has in both cases getting a value of 0. You understand what is happening? If he passes nothing, then it gets 0. Or if he passes 0, even then it gets 0. So how do I distinguish between these two?
We have to read the URL.
That is one way of doing it. That is one way of doing it. But using this parameter, there is no way of distinguishing between. Are we clear on this? Using this parameter, there is no way of distinguishing between that. Now, what if I want to distinguish between that? Saying that, what if he has not passed me a value, then I want to do something else. Now, in such a case, instead of doing this, look at what I can do here. What can I do out here? What is this now taking? What is this taking? A nullable type. Now, if a parameter is not passed, if it is not passed, then it will get a value of null. Then ID will get a value of null. But if a parameter is passed, then it will get the value that is passed in the parameter. So now even if he passes 0, I know what is being passed. So how do I know that he has not passed the value? In that case, what will be the value in this case? Would be null. By default, we'll take it as null. And I could write code which says what? If ID equal to null, then this code is the code for when nothing is passed. Else, this is the code for when something is passed. So I can actually write code in this manner. So if you want to distinguish between the two, whether something is passed or not passed, one possibility, of course, you could have taken it as 0, but would not have given you the difference. The second possibility, you mark it as a nullable type. And let's see how we could now run this code. So again, I want to run with what? I want to find out whether it was passed or not passed. So let's take the situation first where it is not passed. Okay. So /default /index 4. And in this case, what would happen now? ID is currently null. So it will take up whatever value, in the if that you have given out there, it will run that code. And the second possibility here is if you give it a value, then in that case, ID would not be null. It contains now the value of 10. And then you can write that in the else code for whatever you're doing. So this is one of the two ways you can do this. You can, both the ways are okay. In certain situations, you may not want to check for whether what if he's not passed. Just take the default value. So both possibilities exist. Work it out whatever way. So now what could I do here? For example, I could, if I want to, return what will this return? What will this return?
So 404 error.
A 404 error. And then what would this return? What will this return?
The view.
The view that we want. So I could do something like this as well. So when I run this now, and I don't receive an ID, and the ID is compulsory, my code required that the ID should be passed. It gives you a 404, saying that you have passed the URL wrongly. The URL is not recognized. Are we clear on this? And there are other HTTP errors also that you can throw. Okay. But if I pass it correctly, then it will take the correct one. Okay. Clear on this, everybody? All right. Okay, we're going to end with a very simple thing right now. So far, it's not very, a lot of things are not happening out here. All of, the last 2 hours that we've been talking, we've been only talking about concepts. So let's just end the day with a simple, thing wherein we can, the value that I'm receiving here, I want to show it in the view. So we'll end with that. Okay. Now, if you want to pass something from the, your first request is coming where? It's coming to whom? Who receives
Index for action method.
Controller.
Yeah. So where
Controller.
is this? This is in the controller. Now, whatever values you get in the controller, if you'd like to pass them to the view, one way of doing that is using an object called as a view bag. Right? Is using an object called as a view bag. Now, this view bag is part of something called as dynamic coding in C#. We have not seen dynamic coding in C#. Right? Now, in dynamic coding, you have an object called as an expando object. Right? So these are new concepts that I'm throwing at you. We have not seen them in C#. I'm saying that this is a branch of something called as dynamic coding. And in dynamic coding, there is an existing class called as an expando object. Now, what is the basic, purpose of this expando object? Is that you can add properties and methods to it at runtime. You can add properties and methods to it at runtime. Now, this view bag is one such dynamic object, or it's one like an expando object, and you can add properties to it at runtime. So if you look at view bag dot, it does not have any properties. It does not have any properties by default. Whatever properties you want, you can add it at runtime. So for example, I'm saying viewbag.id is equal to ID. This ID is the ID that I'm receiving here. I'm storing that into viewbag. And this viewbag object will also be available to you in the view. All right. So if you'd like to pass something from the controller to the view, one possibility, this is not the only possibility. One possibility is you can use a viewbag. So what I want to do is now is go to the view and show what is the ID that I have received out. Which I'll do here. Which I'll do here. And to do this, you have to use an @. What is @? We've said that before. What is this an example of?
Annotation.
@ is an example of what do you give with @? What I have not used for the last 3-4 days.
Razor code.
Razor code. Right? So @ here allows you to display the value of any variable. If you want to display something, you just say @, and then you can also have a code block, and we'll see variations of that in the next session. But I can directly say @viewbag dot whatever property that I want. Remember, when you say dot, you will not get that property. It is not a property of there. You're adding properties at runtime. So these properties will not show up in the IntelliSense. And I can do something like this. I mean, of course, ID equal to whatever. What is this part? ID equal to, this is HTML code. But @ something is Razor code. So the value that I've received from the URL is being first passed to the controller, and controller is passing this value to the view. Right? This is what is happening out here. Let's try running this. So /default/index/10, and this shows me ID equal to 10. Are we clear on this? Questions, if any? Questions, if any? All right. My question to you then is, somewhere else in this code that you have been, now you all have the code in front of you. Somewhere else in this code, somewhere else there has been a reference to viewback dot something. Somewhere else in your code. Can you at least tell me where else in your code is the viewback dot something references coming somewhere? Look at the
So
pages.
layout.
About and layout.
Right. Not just about, not just about, in the index also. In the home index, home, about, home and contact. In all of them. And in the layout. So see what is happening. See what is happening there. So let me take you to home and whatever, about, let's say. So somewhere else they've said what? Viewback dot title is equal to about. So what are they saying? Create a property called title, which now has what? Has about. Similarly, in contact, what have they done? Viewback dot title is equal to contact. And in index, again, viewback dot title is equal to index. Right? Now this viewback dot title is being displayed on the layout page. Where are they giving this? Title and @viewback dot title. So now what would happen? If you run the index page, the title will be shown as index. If you run the contact page, the title will be shown as contact. And if you run the about page, the title will be shown as about. So this here, they're actually passing it from the view to another view. From the view to the layout. Are you getting this? Why are they doing this? Why can't I give this here itself? Why can't I say about here itself? Why can't I directly say about here itself? Or why can't I directly say index here itself? Why can't I do that?
So it is a shared layout.
Correct. Because this is layout is common for multiple pages. So based on the view that you're showing, you'd like a different title to come in there. All right. Which is why they're saying that in the view, we will store it into what? We will store it into what? Into viewback dot title. Title, this is the property. This is a property that you are creating. It doesn't have any meaning. It could have been called X. So store it in here. Same way, store it in here. Same way, store it in here. And then the layout will read the value from there. This is how it's actually using it. So when you create your own layout, I'm going to give you a to do, or I've already given you a to do, creating your own layout. Use this concept of using viewback dot something to display the data. Are we clear on this? Where else have I used it in my example? I've used it to pass a value from the controller to the view. Okay. So that's all that we have time for today. What do you have to do? You have to try this out at your own pace. So what are the things? Note down the things that we have done. I'll put it in the chat window, right? So that you can also remember what we are doing out. First thing is what? We tried to add a controller. Okay, then what else did we do? Add action methods. With and without layouts. Okay, that's what we did. All right. The earlier to do that I had asked you to do was add your own layout and use it in your views. This is what I had asked you to do earlier. Right. And the last thing that we done here was pass value using view bag. Right. Where are we passing it? From controller to view is one thing that we pass, and the second thing that we tried was from view to your layout page. These are the things that we have done out here. When I come in for the session tomorrow, I am not going to go this slow. This slow always, when I do the first session, I go a little slow because it's a new topic, new things that you're seeing. I'm going to go at 3 times the pace. I'm going to assume you know what's a layout. I'm going to assume you know what's the controller, you know what's the view, you know what is that, setting that root config, when making changes in there, what it does. I'm going to assume you know how to pass values in the variables, and we're going to take it from there. So it is very important that you try out these things and are familiar with the layout, familiar with the structure of your code that we have. We have gone into each and every option, and I've explained to you what that one does. So I expect you to be very, very comfortable with all of this. Right? This is the topic again that's going to be continuation of the earlier thing. So I'm going to continue with this, continue with more examples, and it will help you if you've tried out the things earlier. If you've not tried it out, God help you. Right? We're stopping here for the day. Do you want me to put that into the shared folder? Today's web. I've not done anything. I'll put it in any.